Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing good. Tensei. My name is Sébastien, and welcome to this type design panel. My name is Sébastien. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Grew up in Quebec. My reserve is Opaskwayak Cree Nation, which is 7 hours north of Winnipeg. I'm a type designer. I'm a graphic designer. Also dabble in art. Do a bunch of things. And obviously, I'm here to talk about type. And since I'm an Indigenous type designer, and most of the people that are on the panel are non-Indigenous, we'll have a conversation. Imagine yourself maybe by a fire or having tea. Get yourself some bannock and some good tea and some coffee, and let's just go. So I'll let everybody do a quick introduction of themselves. We can start with Kevin King.
Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here and to speak on the panel with everyone. So my name's Kevin King, and I'm a typeface designer and researcher at Typotheque, which is a typeface design studio based in The Hague, the Netherlands. I'm based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, which is on the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat peoples. And today, the city is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples.
Thank you, Kevin. Up next is John.
Hello. Glad to see everyone, and thank you very much to all the organizers of this amazing conference. My name is John Hudson. I'm a typeface designer and font technologist, a company called Tiro Typeworks, and I'm talking to you from an island in the Salish Sea in the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation.
Thank you, John. Mark.
Greetings. Greetings, everyone. My name is Mark. I'm a type designer and retired educator. I used to teach graphic design, but now I'm exclusively a type designer. I'm headquartered here in Portland, Maine. I am one half of the design team, JamraPatel, and we specialize nowadays mostly on African scripts and writing systems, but I have had experience in designing a Cherokee font, and we've had a lot of experience in working with Indigenous communities in some form or another. And we're all really, I'm really glad to be here and to have this conversation with these guys, and hopefully take your questions and provide you with some answers if I'm lucky.
Thank you, Mark. Patel, up next.
All right. Hi, thanks for having us. Yeah, so I'm the other half of JamraPatel, so Mark and I work together. I'm a type designer, and I also do a lot of stuff with font technology and some kind of language support stuff in computing environments. Mark's kind of explained our foundry, and we're based here in Portland, Maine, and we're excited to talk to everyone.
Well, thank you. So let's start. Obviously, we'd like to get some Q&As here, so I'll just start. So basically, the panel will be based on the notion of moving forward, but most importantly, moving forward together, and what we can learn from each other as indigenous and non-indigenous through type design. So I will introduce the first question that I have in mind. Basically, for an Indigenous type designer, or Indigenous designers as a whole, I think we work closely with our tribe. Since I'm Cree, I work with the elders, the community, and I try to foreshadow anything that could come up with them and see if everything is, I would say, like my granny would say, up to par, and that can be respected on the long term. So what I have as a first question, have you learned anything from the Native communities you've worked with when designing this library or your fonts?
I guess I could start. I mean, one of the things I think we definitely learn is really comes down to like kind of imagine in your head. Like there's a sensibility about what the aesthetic should look like, how things are structured, in Latin type design. But those things we know are not universally true, but it takes some time. I think we've learned a lot, and sort of like through conversation and through sharing and proofs when working with language communities to develop typefaces, to really kind of rewire and broaden the kind of sensibilities of what is considered like aesthetically balanced, because there's just so many different notions of what aesthetically balanced is based on culture. And I think we've learned a lot along those lines as we work with different language communities.
Yeah, it's also like the initial challenge is to sort of put yourself in as well as you can into someone else's head, and that requires a lot of research, a lot of finding out about the language community that you're working for. And that's really one of the most important things. And it's the kind of thing that you can't cut corners on in order to provide the people you're working for with a result that's A, acceptable, B, does what it's supposed to do. And so it's always necessary. It's necessary to do a lot of work. There's a lot of footwork that needs to be done even before the first draft. And in order to really understand who it is you're working for, if it's a language community or if it's a culture that's not your own, it kind of makes sense, but it's not always done. And I think it's just really necessary. It's the indispensable part of the whole process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would second that as well. I mean, in my work, for example, on the syllabics project that we continue to work on at Typotheque, it was something that personally can't imagine undertaking a project like that without not just engaging in a research component, but also establishing a relationship with the communities who use the writing system to understand of course, understanding preferences that might exist for the writing system typographically, but also just technical issues that were barriers to their language revitalization and preservation. For me, I come at it from a perspective of what are the major barriers towards language revitalization and preservation, because it's a very pertinent issue right now. There are languages that are very much at risk of being lost. And I think that in that context, there needs to be a lot of engagement to understand how we can get over these technical hurdles. For myself, what have I learned from working with the communities is, of course, a great deal, but what I've learned is that being a good listener is a great entry point to understanding what these problems are, and then taking some time to digest the issues that are presented and do some research to understand what would be a good solution for a path forward. And I've learned a lot about what this kind of work can mean in terms of reconciliation and also Indigenous self-determination and ownership over their writing systems as well and their language.
My engagement in this area has mostly been in terms of technology and language preservation efforts, rather than specifically typeface design in terms of my own design. So I'm usually kind of making fonts, helping other people who design typefaces implement them in particular ways. Most of the typeface design that happens in the world, and most of the font making that happens in the world, does not engage with communities. It's people design typefaces. They design typefaces that include support for French and German and Spanish and all these lots of languages, just as a matter of course. And it's not like every time that someone sits down to design a typeface, they go and find a German community to advise them on how to do it. In the Indigenous design and font space, this engagement with community is very, very important. But it does mean that every project tends to be quite limited and quite specific. And the other thing that I've really learned in the engagement project that we did through the University of British Columbia with the Musqueam and Okanagan First Peoples is that there's a pacing to these projects that is very different from what I think a lot of type designers like me who do a lot of work for software companies are not used to. And you have to respect that pacing. And it's part of respecting the ownership of the orthographies and dealing with concepts of ownership that are quite different from, say, copyright law in the settler state. That, you know, when you're dealing with communities from whom so much has been taken over the periods of colonization, respecting the people's concerns about what it is that you want to do with their language is important, and listening to those concerns and helping to come to a shared understanding about how type design and fonts can benefit a community while at the same time respecting the community's own wishes.
Interesting. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to add on to that. A lot of that pacing comes from the fact that you have to take into consideration, it's not always, it's also not typical of working, say, for a software company or something like that, but you have to take into consideration that there are very often a lot of intensive discussions going on within the community when you approach them, or they've approached you with this kind of a project, or you've sent proofs or something like that. There are a lot of intensive, particularly if language preservation is an important aspect of what they're trying to achieve, then they know that what you're doing is kind of, you're often establishing a model that will be built upon for years afterwards and generations to come. And so they understand that that is exceedingly important. So and of course, there are many different opinions. You know, any language community will not be all of a like mind as to how things should happen. So there are a lot of discussions going on behind the scene that does change the pace of say your average type design project in that respect.
So from what I understand, what you basically all learned is that you see that there's a preservation of the culture that is going through design and through language. And basically you are trying to find a system that you can build upon that will be on the long run, that could be efficient for the community as a whole. That being said, what I find interesting is that you said that you work for the community. Couldn't you say that since in our culture, in Cree culture especially, we were very much of a collaborative people. Do you say that you'd be working more with the community, since you're also using notions of how we see, protocol-wise, and how we see our culture and our traditions, seeing 7 generations ahead, 7 generations in the past, and to situate ourselves in the present? Because what you're saying in a very non-indigenous way, I would say, is that you're saying that you're moving things forward at the same time, very collaborative.
Yeah, I would say it is very collaborative. We generally, you know, it's a lot of discussion. It's back and forth. We're not really imposing. I think the term for comes from the fact because we're not generally trying to impose any sort of our ideas of how it should be. And so in that sense, it's, you know, we are working with the language community to achieve the vision of what they want in the typefaces that we're developing. We do contribute. There are components we contribute, right? There's aspects about a way a font works in technology that may not work on paper. And we may advise, you know, these things might be problematic. How are we going to best deal with these things in the context of this medium? But we kind of, I mean, it's a lot of, we talk all the time, we go back and forth. It is collaborative for sure. Yeah, and when we do our work, we're generally, you know, some cases we've approached the language community, but there's actually a number of cases where the language community has approached us because we've done, you know, they've seen that we can execute on some of these things. And that's kind of our process usually.
So, I mean, this is something that I always find intriguing, because as a graphic designer and a type designer, when a non-Indigenous client approaches me, how do I take their questions? How do I see how their want and needs? But you are being approached, and I'm also being approached by Indigenous clients as well in that regards. But how do you see it when you have an Indigenous client coming towards you for help? Like how do you see it? How do you try to elaborate questions, or how do you approach it? I'm very intrigued by that.
Well, a lot of times we, it's like Neil was talking about, we sort of have two basic scenarios is where we decide to pursue a script and we have to get in touch with the language community, or a language community gets in touch with us and asks us to, provide them with tools that they can use. And that sort of leads to two different beginnings as to how the whole thing, or two different ways to how the whole process begins. When they get in touch with us, I think it involves and Neil, feel free to jump in here. I think it involves a very intensive back and forth, a discussion. We ask them as many questions as we can in order to get started with our own research into, well, who they are, to put it very bluntly, and what their history is, and how the language works that the writing system serves, and how the writing systems works orthographically, and in order to, we try to get as much data as we can in order to make a viable beginning. If we start the project and we need to find people that we have to get in, that we can talk to within the language community, then it's a little bit different. And that is, we do as much research as we can about the community and their history and their culture as we can up front, and create a first draft first before contacting anyone. This is because we found this to be most advantageous, because first, it gives us something to talk about when we contact them. Secondly, it shows them that we know what we're doing as type designers, and we have the skills to be able to provide them with this kind of a tool. And third, we found it's also a way to be respectful of their time, of the time that they'll be putting into the whole thing. And when you have something right up front for them to consider, it doesn't waste a whole lot of time that you're asking them to put into this project. So it varies slightly, but as I said before, and I'll never get away from it, research is always a huge part of putting yourself in that space to where you can ask the right questions is a huge part of the first part of the project. So
from what I'm hearing is that research builds trust in that regards. You're knowing who and what the reasons are for the font to be made. And Kevin, I know that you're designing a typeface as of now, which is really slick. Could you elaborate on how you went about it?
Oh, thank you. Well, I really like Nabeen is absolutely right with the comment about building respectful and productive or meaningful relationships. They take time, and trust is something that can't just happen in a couple of days. That takes time of building a relationship and having discussions, understanding the needs of the community, and where someone as myself, as a settler designer, is coming. What are my intentions, and being upfront with the communities. For me, it's to find ways to support language revitalization in communities. So the work on the typefaces, the syllabics typefaces, which we do continue to work with the Natchalik community in Western Nunavut, as well as the Dakoth community in Central British Columbia. It took us a lot of time that indeed did have to be built into not just the beginning of the project, but I would say that to support that whole comment is that it has to be something that you're always doing, as well as maintaining the maintenance of the relationship as well, and helping navigate. So something I hope to touch on a bit tomorrow is to describe how we worked very closely with the communities to produce the syllabics fonts that you saw late January, but we're still continuing to understand and guide the communities through a process of, for the Natural Leak, your characters were encoded into Unicode. That's a good thing, but then there is building realistic expectations of what are the steps then that has to happen moving forward before, let's say, you have widespread access to these characters on common digital text platforms. So that's something that I think I learned a lot about, of course, in the process, but it's something that I continue to do in working with the community to help guide them through the process, providing third-party tools. So providing accessibility before those more common tools are available, and helping with navigation, helping convert old documents into the new code points. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the same here. It never ends. It doesn't end. It's not like there's a start and an end to the project. We speak with, the language communities we've been working with for years now. And it's always, even if it's just like tech support questions, I mean, I'll pop on a Zoom call to help someone install a keyboard if that's what's necessary, we're making keyboard apps and some calculators and advocating for the things they need. Because, it's like Kevin was saying, there's a massive amount of stuff. The font is like Unicode step 1, font step 2, and then what's needed to actually be done to work fully in a digital environment is pretty epic. And so it's a relationship that just we keep it keeps going, because we're always kind of, okay, what do you need now? Okay, let's see if we can figure out a way to do this. Okay, there's a workaround we can do today, but I'll talk to our contacts and whatever, this company XYZ, to see what they can do about it, and we just keep going that way until it's hopefully, I mean, I don't know, I don't know if will say it's just, we've successfully completed it all, but I think we're at least keep moving things forward to get closer to that vision.
Yeah.
The distinction between with and for is also one you can look at in terms of question of how do you scale from a tight project that involves your active collaboration with the community to the provision of multiple typefaces in multiple styles designed by multiple people, so that Indigenous designers have tools with which to articulate typography in a language. An English language graphic designer has a choice of tens of thousands of fonts that they can use in their work. Sometimes we talk with people in an Indigenous community, and they will talk about our font. When we use our font, and they literally mean they have one font. It might not even be a Unicode font. It might be something in some old encoding thing, and this is what their community uses. And they have this one way to communicate typographically. And in collaborative projects, we can help them expand that, and we can improve on what they have. But to take up your idea of moving forward, Sébastien, there's a conversation to be had about what it is that Indigenous designers would like to move forward to in terms of scaling up support for Indigenous languages, and particularly for Indigenous languages in the Americas that have Latin script orthographies. Wouldn't it be great to have some of those tens of thousands of typefaces out there in the Latin script extended to support these languages? And that's not something that can be done on a kind of small scale, intensive, collaborative thing on every single font, where we're going to the community every single time there's a new typeface to be done. So there has to be some way to scale up the information while at the same time respecting the ownership culturally of these communities.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Sébastien.
Yeah, we can elaborate. I have a few. I have something to add, basically on that. I've been developing a Cree design methodology, and I'm just going to take this, and also we'll talk about fonts as well. But so something else that is very important in Cree protocol is that one cannot simply come and go from elders' lives without establishing bonds, familiarities, and reciprocal relationships with them. The old people are living resources, and their ways of knowing and teaching must be appreciated and respected. The elders need to be made a reciprocal resource and valued in their roles as keepers and sharers of community knowledge, since they are a living archive. I'm wondering here, basically, how do you build the long term and that affects not only for the font, but you as driving maybe like type, or how are you outside of dealing with the client, this community, where do you bring it at home? Do you talk about it? Like, how do you envision it?
Well, I think that the point that John was making is really important, because, of course, for myself, I've had a lot of experience, and we've all had a lot of experience working specifically with certain communities, which is a very rich process because you're helping those communities specifically. But like John mentions, there does have to be a kind of general set of recommendations that will allow for a more a scaled up version where there can be general typeface practice to accommodate language support. So I think that for myself, what I'm always trying to remember to do when I'm working with the communities at a smaller level is to explain some of the hurdles that they might see, whereas there might be a particular way that they identify with how, let's say, their syllabics should look, or their Latin script should appear. But then there has to be a space to be what is realistic in a general text environment when you're writing an email or you're writing a text message, and the text might not look exactly how you might identify with it. And there can be other aspects to this as well. So I think that communication also means building realistic expectations for the community for what's possible now, and what steps could we take to work towards where you'd like to get to. And then, of course, trying to estimate what when that could be achieved. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think I would add is that, I don't know, for us, it's sort of like the font is a tool, right? It's just a way, it's a means in. And focus kind of is like my primary concern is like, isn't the tool is the way in to make, content that they want and need. So from a information, cultural sharing perspective, and that's really important, right? It's the long form content. It's being able to write books, being able to write expressive things, being able to write all that stuff. So, this work doesn't stop when the font's done, because we're trying to make sure that's achieved, right? We don't always know all the steps there, but each time, every day you find something new, you find a new path, you find a new trick, maybe get them to work somewhere. Because I think in the end, it's like, I guess it's something John was kind of talking about, but it's like, the unfortunate thing is fonts is a business. There's markets that drive the need for fonts, right? And it's unfortunate because, there's a lot of resources out there to generate fonts and get people being able to participate fully in the digital environment. So we have to rely on the markets to kind of drive when big companies want to support writing systems. But at the same time, really, the real goal, that's just what needs to happen, unfortunately, because that's the way it works. But what we really want to do is enable the language community to be able to actually, once they have the tools, to be able to go do the things they need to do. And those are almost two separate things, right? Like, a big company may be satisfied that their font is present, but it doesn't mean that it can really be used well. Like, you'll go into like Word or something, and it doesn't actually do what you want to do, right? And so then we'll have to go and talk to people, or, if you want to do like real good graphic design, you're trying to use Creative Cloud, it doesn't always do what you want to do. And so it's kind of then going back and pushing for things in those areas. And that's just something we do on our own or in collaboration. We get this kind of information from the language community, then we go and say, hey, what can we do about this? How can we get there? We need to get this solved. because in the end, that's what we want to see. We want to see, people's culture be, I don't know, fully realized, in the digital medium, not just, checking a box and not just, yes, it's present, the font is there, I think we're good, we're done, because that's not really the end point. The end point is much further out.
All right.
That's it.
Thanks for
The
that.
point about
Yeah,
point
go
about
ahead.
relationships, I'd like to quickly comment on, especially in reference to that point about elders and the way in which elders are respected and engaged with. The relationships are not always direct. So, for example, when we were getting feedback on a project from the Musqueam First Nation, our contact there was very clear that she was not an elder and that there were decisions that she was not qualified to make, and information that she was not qualified to share. And that's part of the pacing that I talked about earlier. I suspect that the scaling up of the development of new typefaces and fonts for indigenous languages will mean webs of relationships rather than more direct relationships. So there are, for example, organizations like the First Peoples Cultural Foundation in British Columbia who have established relationships with many of the First Nations in terms of helping them document and digitize their languages, and do so in a way that's very respectful of the ownership and what those individual communities are comfortable sharing. And so an organization like that provides a very useful kind of interface between type designers, font developers, technologists, and the First Nations themselves, rather than always having that kind of direct connection.
Okay, thanks, John. I have a few questions here from Mei Chung. What is the process for Unicode acceptance of proposals?
Well, I guess I have some experience preparing and working on something like that. And I think that my approach to working on the Unicode proposal is the same as the typefaces at a basic level, is that I need to first work with the community to understand, well, not just to understand what the barriers that they're facing. For the Naturally community, it was quite simple that their orthography was missing 12 syllabic characters that were not currently encoded in Unicode. And in a situation like that, that's an orthographic barrier where on digital text platforms, you can't reliably have text interchange to write your language the way it just needs to be written. The process of working on something is that you need to, no matter what you're doing in a Unicode proposal, you need to understand, to provide accurate and comprehensive evidence for the need, to show how it fits for the community. So I think, yeah, for myself, that would be my perspective on May's question.
Yeah, I think the process from the Unicode side is they're generally looking for a few things. Amongst them is that what is being proposed is very well established and consistent in use, because I think that ends up, they're a standards body, right? They want things to be standard. If that's not a standard, then they don't want to encode it per se. And where that you can run in trouble, certainly with like not adding individual, updates to orthography, particularly when you're putting it in a whole new writing system, it can be, it's kind of a tough barrier to cross. And so you kind of have to keep working on it, trying to get the evidence together. And I think secondarily, there's this sort of other problem, which is, because we've kind of run this to the community we're working with in Africa, but to get that information that Kevin was talking about, to work with the language community, there is, and to also touch about something John was talking about, is that ownership thing and the concern about that. And so you end up, do they really want encoding? It sort of becomes a question, because what does it mean? There's just kind of a little bit of a concern about what encoding actually means, or what it could be taking away, or what, and sort of talking through what it actually is providing. So you got to cross those initial hurdles, and then you got to work through the process of Unicode.
I'll just give a little plug for the workshop that Neil and I are running on Sunday afternoon with Bridget Chase from the First Peoples Cultural Foundation, and Neil will be talking a lot about how to prepare proposals and that whole process.
All right, thanks. We'll go to another question here. So we have
Craig has asked a really interesting question.
Yeah, do you feel like you're obtaining the aesthetic judgment skills appropriate to the script through research and consultation for yourself? Or do you feel the aesthetic judgment parts of your type design practice are sidelined so that those decisions are left to the communities?
That's such a great question.
It's a fun really blend there for sure. I think Mark has things to offer on this as well, but I just want to point out, when we're working with the language community, we speak type design, and then, you work with the language community, they don't speak type design. So I would say so much of the process is calibrating the language. They'll say something's not right here, but you don't always know what's not right. And they might suggest something, but it may not be the thing that actually is the thing. And it's really a lot of, so in some ways what Craig's asking is both in a way. I mean, you're learning some, but it's largely because we're also trying to translate a concept that is not articulated in the way we're used to hearing it about the aesthetics, and then turning that into a result that actually is the one that they want. And it's not always a direct line of what is being said to what it needs to be done. So that's, kind of my little bit there.
For me, one of the things I really love about what it is we do is that I learn so much about other peoples and other cultures, and it's what you learn is just one of the greatest parts of this. And specifically to what Craig is asking here, well, anyone who's ever taught knows that the dirty little secret about teaching is you learn as much as your students. And because there's this loop, always this feedback loop that sort of expands what you know about what it is you're teaching. Specific to Craig's question, it's always a charge to feel through the research and the conversations with the language community to feel my own sense of aesthetic being expanded from what it previously was before we started working with them, and having to accommodate another sensibility, or trying to accommodate another sensibility, and trying to incorporate their feedback into it as much as possible. But specifically, when you're the one who's designing the type, then it's kind of a fine line to walk. You're always careful about, how much am I bringing into this for my world, and how much of that is too much, and how am I able to bring as much of the world of the language community we're working for into what it is I'm doing, since I'm sort of I'm the one here pushing the mouse and pulling the nodes and things like that. So it's a fine line to walk.
We only have a few minutes here. Is there any closing remarks that you might want to add, or? No.
Silence.
Total silence. That was super free protocol.
Yeah.
Moments of silence is like ceremony. We just shared something right there. Okay, so we're good. So we'll end here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, Mark, Nabeen, and John, for your time. Really appreciate it. Everybody that's been on the panels as of now, since noon today, you've been excellent. It's been amazing. This is such a great time. I was super nervous when I started this. This is amazing. I'm so happy to see Indigenous and non-Indigenous type designers coming in this one place and sharing knowledge, sharing tradition. To me, this is like doing a ceremony. Hopefully everybody's doing fine out there. And again, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.